light. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Saratoga County Monthly Honor Deceased Veterans Program. At this time, I'd ask you all to please rise for our Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for our invocation by our honorary county chaplain, Paul O'Keefe.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good afternoon, everyone. Gentlemen, please uncover. I already did. Our Supreme Commander in heaven, we thank you for giving us this day to honor and pay tribute to our deceased veteran of the month. June's veteran is Raymond Butch Giroux Jr. of Waterford. I have been reciting prayers for our precious deceased veterans for a while, and every once in a while, I know the veteran or a family member. This afternoon, I never knew Raymond, but I worked in the research lab at General Electric Silicones with his mother-in-law, Mary Calzo, for several years, as she was our dedicated secretary, and she was outstanding. Nice seeing you again, Mary, after 30 years. We offer our sincere condolences to you, your daughter Janice, and your entire family. Nice seeing you, Mary. Oh God, by whose mercy the faithful departed find rest, look kindly on our departed veteran, Raymond Butch Giroux Jr. Grant that through the passion, death, and resurrection of your Son, they may share in the joy of your heavenly wisdom kingdom and rejoice in you with your saints forever. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you.
Please be seated. And thank you so much to Chaplain O'Keefe,
Welcome, Director.
Korean War veteran, and here for us every month. We appreciate you. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Board of Supervisors, we'd like to welcome you to our ceremony honoring our deceased veterans. The intent of this ceremony is to recognize our veterans and their families for serving their country and serving their community. Since August of 1999, the residents of Saratoga County have recognized over 300 of our own men and women who have answered the call to duty. As mentioned, this month's veteran is Raymond J. Butch Giroux Jr. of the town of Waterford. Raymond, or Butch as he was known to family and friends, was born on April 9th, 1948 to his parents, Raymond and Lois Giroux. Butch graduated from Cohoes High School in 1966. The years of 68 and 69 are looked back as tumultuous and now are associated with civil unrest and the peaking of the counterculture movement of the 1960s. 1968 started out with the war in Vietnam raging. The U.S. had lost its 10,000th aircraft over Vietnam, and the North Vietnamese launched the Tet Offensive just past midnight on January 31st. President Lyndon Johnson, after announcing he would not seek re-election, would later halt all bombing in North Vietnam. The Apollo space program is in full swing and about to land a man on the moon. Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. are assassinated. In the midst of it all, as a young man just out of high school and working as a mechanic, Ray answered the draft notice he received in the mail, and he quietly entered the United States Army on March 8th, 1968 in Albany, New York. He was just 19 years old, and it was just as the Tet Offensive of 68 was all over the TV and the newspapers. He put his head down. He answered the call to duty. After basic training, he received technical training at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. He was trained as an artillery power generator equipment mechanic and operator before being sent to Vietnam as a replacement in August of 1968. In Vietnam, he was assigned to the 25th Infantry Division Artillery, or known as the 25th DIVARTY. And his unit was assigned to provide artillery support to the 27th Infantry Regiment in the Tay Ninh province of Vietnam, just north in proximity to the Iron Triangle. The Tay Ninh province served as a major terminus of the Ho Chi Minh Trail during the Vietnam War, and it was a hotbed of activity. He was tasked with repairing and maintaining the trucks and equipment needed to keep his unit operational. But he would also be drawn into heavy ground combat with the enemy throughout his time in Vietnam. In an interview on his experience in Vietnam that I had the privilege of being able to listen to, Butch discussed a harrowing experience on February 28, 1969. They came under a full attack, and the attacks were part of the Second Tet Offensive of 1969. His unit was overrun by huge numbers of North Vietnamese. In the days leading up to the attack, the enemy had snuck personnel into their area of operations. And once the attack commenced, they came under fire from all angles. Butch was in his fighting position with two other soldiers, both of whom which were shot. He took action. He helped tend to their wounds as best he could, and then had to maintain his fighting position on his own. His unit was able to maintain their position and push back the attack, but not after inflicting severe casualties on the enemy forces and suffering significant casualties themselves. That day certainly stood out to him, and I'm not really sure that we here can truly imagine what it was really like. Again, his tour in Vietnam had no shortage of activity in combat. He would be awarded the Vietnam Service Medal with 4 Bronze Service Stars for participation in the following campaigns: the Vietnam Counteroffensive Phase 5, Counteroffensive Phase 6, the Tet 69 Counteroffensive, and the Vietnam Summer-Fall 1969 campaign. He was also awarded the Vietnam Campaign Medal with 60 device and the Army Commendation Medal with V device for valor, a medal awarded for acts of valor in combat. Butch made it through his tour in Vietnam, and he returned to the United States on August 22nd of 69. He would complete his enlistment at Fort Bliss, Texas, assisting in training new soldiers to prepare them for their deployment to Vietnam. He separated at the rank of specialist on March 6th of 1970. In addition to the awards previously mentioned, he was also awarded the National Defense Service Medal, the Army Commendation Medal with 1st Oak Leaf Cluster, the Good Conduct Medal, and the Rifle Sharpshooter Badge. And like many of his generation, Butch would carry the Vietnam War with him for the rest of his life. To quote his own words about his service, he said, quote, "It made me a lot harder than I probably should be. I shouldn't be this hard. I didn't have a hard life. My parents took very good care of me." Butch would go on to run a business, raise a family, pursue his passions in the outdoors. He was well known for his willingness to mentor friends and family in the sports of hunting and fishing. The Vietnam War would eventually catch up with him again, like so many, and Butch suffered from the effects of Agent Orange and eventually took his life. He suffered from cancer and serious complications as a result. On a personal note, I came to know Butch and I was able to interact with him in our office. And I think that our interaction speaks volumes about the type of man that he was. He was very humble. He cared about Janice. He cared about his kids and his grandkids. And I knew that he was suffering, and he never really complained about any of it. We would discuss navigating the VA system, and naturally he'd express a little bit of frustration with the red tape, but he was never not the Butch that I knew. He was just trying to take care of the task at hand. He put his head down and he was working through it. And it was an honor to work with him and to just play such a small role in assisting somebody who had given so much and somebody who was so special. And I thank him for that. At this time, I'd like to introduce our town supervisor from the town of Waterford, Supervisor John Lawler.
Good afternoon, everybody, and special welcome to Butch's family and friends who are here today to acknowledge and to participate in Saratoga County's recognition of Butch Giroux as our deceased veteran of the month. I can tell you one of the most challenging things every town supervisor has to do, and there are several here, is when it's your town's turn for this ceremony, is who do you select? We rely on the advice and support of our local VFW for some thoughts in that regard. But it is always a challenge because there are so many veterans who are so worthy of this ceremony and frankly, a lot more than this ceremony. But it was interesting for me when the decision was made, when Frank suggested Butch's name, because I was born on Clifton Street. I knew Butch growing up. I'm younger than Butch, so I can't say I hung around with him. But I knew Butch, and I knew if you had a problem with your car, Butch Giroux was the guy you wanted to talk to. You wanted to get Butch's ear. If you could, he was quiet. He didn't talk a whole lot. But he certainly was a very skilled craftsman with anything to do with mechanics and auto body work. He was extremely well liked in our town. He was a good man. I think that's the word that kind of sums him up for me is Butch was a good man. He was a quiet man, but he was a good man. And I never heard anyone say anything but wonderful things about Butch. And he was giving of himself when it came time to help his friends with whatever problems that they had. So I'm real happy that Butch is Waterford's nominee for deceased veteran of the month. I think he more than deserves this ceremony. Although if he were here, I'm pretty sure he would say, why are you people doing this? Don't you have better things to do? You should, right? I mean, his family's laughing, but that's what he would say. He would say, I'm not going. He would say, you go if you want to go, but I'm not going. And that's just how Butch was. And I'm sure that's how a great many of the servicemen, deceased servicemen and women who get honored at this. I think that's a trait that they all share. Frank mentioned he was a humble man. He was a humble man. And I think he would be mortified at being recognized at something like this. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge a gentleman here. And I just, people care about their veterans, and they should. They care about their deceased veterans, their current service members, past service members. And today we have a veteran from World War II, Tommy Catello. Tom just reminded me he's 98. I said, stop telling me how young you are. But Tom Catello took the time to be here today to honor Waterford's deceased veteran. So thank you, Tom, for making this trip up. I appreciate it. I'm sure the family does. And I know making these trips isn't the easiest thing in the world for you. So it's especially wonderful to have you here today. Tom was just one of our two grand marshals for our Memorial Day parade. So I'm glad to see Tom again. And I have one other person I want to introduce who was a friend of Butch, who did spend time with Butch. He's a town councilman, but he's also a good friend of mine. And I know he was a good friend of Butch's. And that's Dave Ball. Dave Ball is here today. And Dave asked if he could say a few words because he was a good friend of Butch's. And I would, if it's okay with the chairman and the other folks behind me who really have the authority in this room, I'd like to give Dave a few minutes at the microphone so he could talk about Butch for a second. And then we'll have a few things for the family. I'll come back and make these presentations. David?
Well, Supervisor Laura was right about one thing. It will be a few seconds. And he's right. Butch would say, what are we doing here? But as a friend, Butch was a good man. Keith, Paul, Bob, Freddie, you know what I'm talking about. Okay. He loved hunting, fishing, Harleys, teaching other people how to do both those other things, ride, hunt, fish, fix cars, tell a good joke, have a few beers, a great laugh. And he brought us all together many times around one of those activities. Many hours at the camp, many hours at a boat, many hours on a Harley, doing something and just having fun. Butch did know how to live. Despite the toll that war took on him, he He lived hard, he lived well, and he lived a good life. And we thank him.
And I have two things I'd like to present to the family. The first is a resolution passed by the Waterford Town Board. It's a resolution of the Town Board of the Town of Waterford, New York, honoring Raymond J. Butch Giroux. Whereas the town board desires to recognize those of its residents who have served this country in the armed forces during times of war or armed conflict. Whereas the most fitting honor this town board can bestow is to recognize and thank those who have answered the call of duty to our country. Whereas the town board recognizes that we are all able to collectively live in a free society only because of the sacrifices of such veterans. Whereas one such resident who served this country at its time of need is Raymond J. Butch Giroux. Whereas Specialist Giroux served as an artillery power generator equipment mechanic operator for the U.S. Army and was assigned to the 25th Infantry Division Artillery. Whereas Specialist Giroux served overseas in Vietnam from August 24th, 1968 to August 22nd, 1969. Whereas Specialist Giroux valiantly served in Vietnam and received the following service medals: the National Defense Service Medal, the Army Commendation Medal with First Oak Leaf Cluster, the Vietnam Service Medal with 4 Bronze Stars in Vietnam Campaign Medal, with Device Army Commendation Medal, with V Device, Good Conduct Medal, and the Rifle Sharpshooter Badge. Now therefore be it resolved that the town board hereby recognizes and honors Raymond J. Butch Giroux for his service to his country. And that was passed by the town board on June 7th of this year. And then we have this plaque that we'd like to present from the town to the family. And it simply says Raymond J. Butch Giroux Jr., Specialist, U.S. Army, 1968-1970, Vietnam. And then it mentions again all of his medals that he won for his service, and he was awarded for all of the wonderful things that he did in the service. So I'd like to present these to the family. And again, thank you so much for being here today to helping us honor Butch.
Thank you, Supervisor. And now I'd like to introduce our Chairman of the Board of Supervisors, Supervisor Todd Kuzniers from the town of Moreau, to present a county proclamation.
Thank you very much, Frank, and for all the hard work you do monthly, putting all this information together so that we can recognize these very important individuals. I'd like to thank Supervisor Lawler and Councilman for your personal remarks to shed some light on Butch's personal life and what he meant in the community. It's a very important honor for me. One of the most important events that I get to do is to speak at the deceased veterans ceremony, where we recognize a deserving deceased veteran here in Saratoga County. And with me today, I do have some of my colleagues. In addition to Supervisor Lawler, we have Supervisor Lant, we have Supervisor Butler, and we have Supervisor Mo Wright from the town of Hadley, who's actually pulling double duty today, who is standing in for our chairman of the Veterans Committee. I'm also pleased to be joined by our county elected officials who, by their being here, demonstrates the significance of this ceremony. We have on my far left, we have District Attorney Karen Hagan, and we have to her right, County Clerk Craig Hayner, and they'll be offering a few remarks here shortly. One of the things that we sometimes overlook is the service of our veteran. I mean, we have Memorial Day, and everybody gathers and remembers the sacrifices that families and individuals make for freedom in our country. And so, as a result of that, you heard Frank talk about, we've been doing this program since 1999, and that demonstrates here in Saratoga County how important it is that we recognize our deceased veterans. So with that, I'm pleased to offer the following proclamation on behalf of the board, Saratoga County Board of Supervisors. And I'd like to read it in its entirety, and then we'll present the plaque to the family. But before I begin, I do want to recognize and thank everyone for being here, first of all, and also recognize the family. We have Janice, Butch's wife. We have Kristin and Danielle, and which are two of his daughters. And I believe Ray was unable to be here, Ray Jr., who is working today, but I know he's watching via live. So welcome, Ray. And we also have grandchildren of Butch with us this afternoon. So with that, I'd like to read the proclamation in its entirety. And it states, whereas the freedom, security, and prosperity that the American people have enjoyed throughout the history of our nation have been preserved due to the heroism and sacrifices of the men and women who have served in our armed forces. And whereas the Saratoga County Board of Supervisors wishes to honor and memorialize the lives and courageous deeds of members of the armed forces who have served with distinction in the defense of our nation. And whereas Raymond J. Butch Giroux Jr. was a Saratoga County resident who proudly served our country and our county in the armed services of the United States. And whereas Butch Giroux of the town of Waterford served in the United States Army as an artillery power generator equipment mechanic / operator during the Vietnam War from August 24th, 1968 through August 22nd, 1969. And whereas Butch was assigned to the 25th Infantry Division Artillery in Vietnam, and his unit was assigned to provide artillery support to the 1st Battalion, 27th Infantry Regiment in the Tay Ninh Province in close proximity to the Iron Triangle. While he was tasked with operating and maintaining power equipment, Butch was involved in heavy ground combat with the enemy, which earned him the Army Commendation Medal with V device for valor in action against the enemy. And whereas Butch Giroux completed his enlistment after his tour in Vietnam at Fort Bliss, Texas, where he trained incoming soldiers and eventually separated at the rank of specialist on March 6, 1970. And whereas for his service, Butch Giroux was also awarded the National Defense Service Medal, Army Commendation Medal with 1 oak leaf cluster, Vietnam Service Medal with 4 Bronze Service Stars, Vietnam Campaign Medal with device, Good Conduct Medal, and Rifle Sharpshooter Badge. And whereas at home, Butch owned and operated the Congress Street Garage in Cohoes and later worked for the BPI Piping in Waterford. Butch was an outdoorsman who loved fishing and hunting with friends and family, and he enjoyed mentoring anyone who wanted to learn outdoor sporting activities. And whereas Raymond J. Giroux Jr. risked his life in the defense of the principles of freedom and democracy for which our nation stands, and whereas it is fitting that the heroic services and sacrifice of Raymond J. Giroux Jr. for his nation and community be recognized and remembered, and his memory be honored, now therefore be it proclaimed that the 21st day of June 2022 is hereby dedicated to the memory of Raymond J. Butch Giroux Jr. and grateful recognition by the Saratoga County Board of Supervisors on behalf of all the citizens of the county for the service and sacrifice made by him for his country. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand and affixed the seal of the Saratoga County Board of Supervisors this 21st day of June 2022. So thank you very much. And if you would come forward, I do have the proclamation for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And now I'd like to introduce our Saratoga County Clerk, Craig Hayner.
Thank you so much, Frank. It's truly an honor and just so grateful to have the opportunity to partake in this ceremony today to honor your husband and your father, your grandfather. And this really underscores the importance, seeing such a great turnout today for one of these ceremonies. It really underscores the importance of just how impactful and just how much sacrifice a person, and learning about what Butch did when he was in his service and what he did afterwards. We can never underestimate just how much of an impact that has. And I think for his grandchildren, maybe they wouldn't know all the things that he did in his life. But it's so important for us to remember these things, because there's so many people who have sacrificed so much, and many of them are in this room today and never talk about it. And we're just so grateful that we have the chance to honor him, and knowing how humble he was after listening to Frank and Dave and Jack. I think it's even more fitting that you're honoring him today and his legacy. It really is quite a tribute to that. I wrote a special commemoration for him that I'd like to read to you. On this 21st day of June, 2022, we commemorate and give honor to the life and military service of Raymond Butch Giroux Jr.'s legacy is weaved into the fabric of American exceptionalism, reflecting his selfless dedication and service to others, not only for his country, but also to his community. 246 years ago, our nation was founded upon the principles of freedom and liberty as provided to us through our God-given unalienable rights. Ever since that time, every generation has had the responsibility to pass that on to the next generation. And we know that oftentimes tremendous sacrifices have been made to uphold and support these principles that we all hold dear as Americans. For his duty to our country and for doing his part to uphold our most treasured values as Americans, we are grateful to honor Raymond Butch J. Jr.'s military and life service here in Saratoga County today. And I would just like to close by saying God bless Butch, and God bless all our Vietnam veterans and all of our veterans. We're so grateful for his service and their service, and we will never forget. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I'd like to introduce our Saratoga County District Attorney, Karen Hagan.
Thank you, Frank. You're getting a laugh from them over there because the podium's bigger than I am, which is why I'm coming over here to talk with you. We have to stick together some ways. There you go. It's my distinct honor and privilege to join today with the men and women behind me and all of you in honoring the life, the accomplishments, and the contributions of your husband and your dad and your grandfather. Clearly, his life is part of the fabric of our community and our county, and all of the things he did for all the rest of us, we celebrate and are so privileged as Americans to enjoy the freedoms because his service is part of that contribution. We don't get to exist in our government. We don't get to do all of our jobs as elected and appointed officials without the sacrifices of our servicemen and women and their families, because it is something that is not just during their time of service, but for years later. And it's such a heartwarming time to hear about the great impact that he made on all of your lives and our communities. And so I've taken a moment to just write a very short note to all of you, but I'm here to say thank you and to say a job and a life well done. And it's our pleasure to be able to recognize that. So thank you very much. Good job.
Thank you. Assemblyman John Mcdonald, representing the 108th Assembly District, couldn't be here today, but he has sent a representative, Mike Sackelman, who would like to make a presentation.
Good afternoon. On behalf of Assemblymember McDonald, I'm honored to be here today to present a citation to the family of Raymond Butch Giroux Jr. And I'd like to read that citation now. Whereas the greatness of the state of New York must be viewed as a reflection of its citizens who give exemplary service to their communities, particularly those singular individuals who distinguish themselves through conspicuous military careers. Whereas Raymond J. Butch Giroux Jr. was born April 9th, 1948, and enlisted in the United States Army on March 8th, 1968. Whereas Butch served overseas in Vietnam from August 24th, 1968 through August 22nd, 1969, as an artillery power generator equipment mechanic / operator. Butch received the National Defense Service Medal, an Army Commendation Medal with 1 oak leaf cluster, the Vietnam Service Medal with 4 Bronze Service Stars, the Vietnam Campaign Medal, the Good Conduct Medal, and a Rifle Sharpshooter badge. Whereas Corporal Giroux was discharged March 6, 1970, which was the owner and operator of the Congress Garage in Cohoes, and later worked for BPI Piping in Waterford. He's graciously survived by his wife Janice and his 3 children, Ray, Danielle, and Kristin. Whereas in recognition of this faithful service, the family, friends, and comrades of just such a man wish to recognize him and honor him for his dedication and service on behalf of our nation. Now therefore be it resolved that as a duly elected member of the New York State Assembly, I acknowledge and pay tribute to Raymond J. Butch Giroux Jr. as an outstanding citizen who is worthy of the esteem of both the community and the great state of New York. In witness whereof, I appear hereunto set my hand and signature this 21st day of June, 2022. John T. Mcdonald III, 108th Assembly District. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And now I'd like to introduce our New York State Senator from the 43rd Senate District, Daphne Jordan.
Good afternoon. As a New York State Senator, probably one of the things that has been the most meaningful to me is meeting and recognizing veterans and honoring those that are no longer with us. And today, I'm very, very honored to be here to recognize Raymond Giroux. As everyone's been calling him Butch. I didn't know him, so I feel a little silly calling him Butch, but I will. I feel like I know him from listening to everybody here and also from writing my own proclamation, which I will not read to you because it's mostly, we've heard it. But I will tell you my thoughts as to Butch and so many like him. You know, he served in Vietnam. He was there for a full year, just 2 days short of a year from what I read. And he was involved in heavy ground combat with the enemy forces. So he saw the worst of what we could all imagine. And to me, that's it's horrifying. And when I look at the veterans sitting here, I often wonder what they've seen with their eyes. I can't even imagine. And I know Butch saw that. He was able to come home in one piece, and that was great news. He wasn't honored the way he should have been, being a Vietnam veteran. They were not welcomed home the way they should have been. I hope during his lifetime, that he knew that we do honor him. I hope that he knows now that we're all here for him and that he's aware of that, because honoring those who gave us so much is very important. It couldn't be more important. Something that also struck me, you know, he came home in one piece, but there are often things we don't see. So many veterans suffer from PTSD, which suffered from the effects of Agent Orange. And of course, Agent Orange, I don't know if the grandchildren here know exactly what that was, but it was a herbicide used to defoliate the forestry and the vegetation that was in Vietnam, so that because the enemy would hide in it. And so it was used to get rid of that, all the foliage, so that they could see the enemy. It was also used to destroy the crops so that the food source for the enemy was not plentiful. So it contains something called dioxin, and that was the poison in Agent Orange. And I'm so sorry that Butch suffered from that and eventually succumbed to that. That was all part of Vietnam. So he lived with Vietnam for a very long time for all of us. And I am very thankful for his service as New York State Senator. I have brought a proclamation to give to you. And I've also brought with me the New York State Liberty Award, which is the highest award that a New York State Senator can give to one that has served their community or their state and is held in high regard. And Butch is. And I thank you, Janice, for his service and the rest of the family as well.
Thanks to Senator Jordan. Congressman Paul Tonko, representing the 20th Congressional District, could not be here today, but he did send a representative. Monik Elahi will present a flag that has flown over the nation's capital in honor of Butch. Monik.
Thank you, Frank. You know, it takes a certain type of individual or individuals to give back to their community, their state, their country more than what they got. In fact, in this case, Butch saw the ugliest thing that the world has to offer. And he still came back and chose to love his community, to come back in the passion, with the passion that he went into the service with. And the existential questions of humanity, one of them is, did my life make a difference? And in Butch's case, the answer is a resounding yes. The fact that all these people are here, it takes a lot to get Democrats and Republicans in a room. So the fact that Butch was able to do that, Butch was able to give the incredible service that he gave to this country, I can certainly say the Republic stands on his service, truly. And in recognition of that, the congressman who's in Washington, D.C., who couldn't have the pleasure of attending this event as a result of that, has tasked me to give you a letter that he's personally written to Janice and the rest of the family, and also a certificate acknowledging that a flag was dedicated to be flown over the United States Capitol in recognition of Butch's service. And I could not be prouder to hand that over to you today. Again, thank you for allowing, and to the crew here, thank you and to the family as well. Thank you just for allowing the time and space for us to recognize our veterans. It's one of the most important privileges we have as members who are either in elected office or in appointed service to our country and our state. Just thank you. I appreciate it.
We would ask that those who can stand, please stand in respect to the flag. Present. Arm.
Thank you. Please be seated again. Just a couple of more presentations before we move outside. And for those who didn't hear, the gentlemen are taking that flag outside. Once we finish inside, we'll all move out front for a flag raising ceremony. That flag will fly here in Butch's name for 30 days, at which time we'll take it down, we'll put it in a nice case and return it back to you through the supervisor's office. I want to take just a brief second to point out my staff in the back that help out with the ceremony and do most of the work. Megan Cutbush back there does most of the running around and legwork for this program, and she does a great job. So thank you, Megan. Our Veteran Service Officer, Paul Masso, is back there. He meets with our clients on a day-to-day basis. Thank you, Paul. And I'm very fortunate because here in Saratoga County, not every county does it this way, but in our county, we have a committee at the Board of Supervisors dedicated to coordinating all of the programming involved with veteran services, including this ceremony, but all of our efforts that we have here, including everything that happens at my agency. Our chairman couldn't be with us, Supervisor Tom Richardson from Mechanicville, but he has asked his vice chair, Supervisor Mo Wright from the town of Hadley, to make a presentation on behalf of the County Veterans Committee.
Thank you, Frank. On behalf of the Saratoga County Veterans Committee, I'd like to personally thank the Giroux family for allowing us to honor Butch here today. It's another truly amazing story that we get to hear once a month here at Saratoga County. Saratoga County would like to consider every day Veterans Day. Any veteran in the room, I'd like to personally thank them for their service and personally thank the family for Butch. Today, I have the honor of presenting the Saratoga County Vietnam Veteran Medal. It's presented the 21st day of June, 2022 to the family of Raymond J. Butch Giroux Jr., town of Waterford, United States Army, in recognition and appreciation of his faithful service to our country and the armed forces in the United States of America. And it's signed Theodore Kuzniak, Chairman of the Board of Supervisors, Saratoga County.
Thank you, Supervisor. And now Butch's daughter Danielle is asked to say a few words, and if you'd join us, and I'm sorry for choking up earlier, so, okay. We grew up together.
This is Frankie to me, yeah. Thanks so much for having us today. I just jotted this down this morning, so I apologize if it's a little broken, but I just wanted to say a few things. And it's actually along the lines of what Frankie brought up about my dad. As a kid, when I would ask my dad what he did in Vietnam, he had only one response. It was a stock response, and he said he peeled potatoes. And that's all I ever got out of him. But I used to sneak into his room when I was a kid and look through his box of pins and medals and photos. And that's actually what's out in the display out there, is exactly the box that I would look through as a little kid. So those are the photos I saw. But I still never fully understood. In 2016, it was pretty much right before he died from cancer. My father did an interview with an exchange student about his time in Vietnam, and I could never bring myself to listen to it. But yesterday I finally did. It was so moving and eye-opening, the way he described what he had to go through. No choice, no argument. He just had to do it and try to make it through and make it out alive. He said one thing during that interview that I'd like to talk about briefly. He said kids of parents in the service had a better chance of handling what they were about to go through. and his father was in the service. He said there was no telling your father you weren't going. There was no, where am I? No telling him you couldn't hack it, no coming home. During those first few days, he said they were unbelievably awful. They were trying to find your limit, I guess, and see if and how you would break. But having that strict upbringing really helped, he said. And when he was asked how the war changed him, this is what Frankie said earlier, he said it made him hard, much harder than he wished he were. Without ever really realizing it, I was raised in the same way as my father. He was strict. And there were things you simply did and you didn't complain and you didn't question. Work, for example, you turn 16, you work, you contribute to society and your community, and you don't complain. He made me hard too. I think my kids who are here today can attest to that. I'm tough in more ways than one, just like my dad. I never considered how his time in Vietnam shaped him, or me for that matter. But as he grew older, he softened. He did. I think it took a long time, but the Ray Giroux, who was there before the war, never left fully, and he made his way back. He was able to, in some ways at least, escape the terrible trauma that Vietnam caused, even if for brief moments. And understanding all this, I find I can soften too. And maybe my kids hearing this will come to understand how war can affect people generationally, not just individually. And that we all have something to take away from my father's time in Vietnam. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Danny. And this concludes the inside portion of our ceremony. I would just ask if the family would stick around just really quickly for a quick photograph before we go outside. And then we're going to move outside. If everybody could just line up in the sidewalk in front for our flag raising portion of this ceremony. Thank you.
Our chaplain will keep in our closing prayer.
Our Heavenly Father, as we depart from this deceased veteran ceremony, give us a safe journey home to family and friends. Grant peace, eternal rest to all of our precious departed comrades. Comfort, consolidation to their families and friends. Amen. You may cover.
Ready. Hey. Detail, order.